Gravity Rush is such an interesting specimen in my opinion. Sprouted from the mind of Keiichiro Toyama, the director of the original Silent Hill, who then went on to create the insane Siren series, Gravity Rush is a high-flying open-world game about a magical girl with the ability to manipulate the direction of gravity around her. Yeah, it's not at all like the other stuff he's worked on, but you can still feel that strange horror influence in certain aspects of the game, giving it a much more interesting feel than the typical magical girl story. The game was originally being developed for the PS3 before being transferred over to and released on the Vita, then being ported over to the PS4. It's had a roundabout journey towards a home console release, but it's being welcomed back with open arms as its sequel is now a full-blown PS4 game that looks like it's going to be really great. I really want this series to do well, and what better way to help than creating a video on the first game to try to get you into it so you can then jump right into the sequel. The game is centered around a girl named Kat who awakens in a city in the sky called Hexville without any recollection of her past. She meets an actual cat with a bizarre cosmic appearance who tags along with her and imbues her with gravity manipulation powers. With nothing else for an amnesiac to do, she decides to use these powers to protect the people of Hexville from mysterious creatures called Nevi which have been appearing and causing destruction all over this floating world. You'll meet interesting people, fly to colorful worlds, while taking on peculiar monsters alongside the occasional odd job like working as a maid for a quick paycheck. Overall, the game is pretty lighthearted with bits of humor sprinkled in. Kat is a fun character to play as, and her situation and snarky but curious personality naturally leads her into funny circumstances. The game does have its darker moments though, which are handled really well as you'd expect from the director of two great horror franchises. These have more to do with just how strange the nature of this world is, which frames everything in a really interesting way. Kat may have amnesia, but no one knows the true nature of the world around them, with unexplainable gravity storms that bring in enemies to destroy them, or what exactly lies further down the pillar their cities are built upon. Time travel and dimensional hopping will become anomalies you're all too familiar with. It's a very mysterious game that leaves a ton for you to question while you play, and that's something really alluring about exploring its world and what makes the prospect of exploring it in a new light in a sequel so appealing. The Nevi are a really puzzling foe, and in a lot of ways they remind me of the Shades from Nier conceptually. That isn't the only comparison to Nier I could make, and hopefully that gives you an idea of what kind of cryptic world you're getting into. I first beat this game when it originally came out on the Vita, and I really enjoyed it. It felt really unique to play on a handheld, and the scale of its world and detail on display really impressed me. Now with its re-release on PS4, I'm impressed all over again thanks to the tremendous resolution and frame rate jump. It feels great being able to see and experience this world again, but in a much more crisp and smooth form. In many ways, it feels right at home on home consoles, which is a testament to the technology, art design, and general quality game design that it was originally created with. If anything, I was so impressed by the game on Vita because of how much more ambitious and like a home console release it was. They wanted to make a good game first and foremost, not some gimmicky Vita showcase, so naturally it would remain a good game even when taken off of that platform. Even the graphics look great, supported by a fantastic art style that isn't affected much by its age, and remember, this did originally come out 5 years ago on a console you could carry around in your pocket. But some aspects of the experience are still very much that of a handheld, so don't be surprised by some of its presentation choices. There really isn't any voice acting to speak of. Well, there is for a few cutscenes, but everyone speaks a made-up pseudo-French language, which I think is pretty cool. So you'll be reading a lot and watching still image cutscenes. Thankfully, the music in the game is really good and keeps things audibly interesting at all times. The soundtrack is very jazzy and atmospheric, which really fits and enhances the setting, and I'll have you tapping your toes as you soar through the 4 stylistically different cities of this world. The game definitely has a nice sense of style, and its character designs are fantastic, even for the random characters you only talk to once or twice while running around the city. Every little character has a lot of personality to them just from their strong designs alone. The way Kat's gravity powers look and feel to control are also really well done. At any point you can suspend gravity and then direct it in whatever way you wish. This is your primary form of transportation around the world, and you'll be using it in combat for maneuvering and attacking. There are many open world games that have interesting modes of transportation, but flying around in this game is something that never gets old for me. There isn't that much to do in the cities aside from collecting gems to level up, taking on challenges, and a handful of side missions which can be very entertaining, but I could seriously just fly around for hours and not get bored. No other game does flying like this game because you really aren't flying. You're just being shot in different directions based on where you decide to send gravity. Even other people and items aren't safe from being swept up alongside you, which is pretty funny to see. Kat doesn't stick her arms out and fly around gracefully, she bends and flops around as she's sent skyrocketing. It really is more of a gravity daze than a rush like the original Japanese name suggests, as you get yanked in different directions like you're just along for the ride, starting and stopping and losing track of whether you're running on the floor or the ceiling. There's such a nice ebb and flow to everything as you manage your gravity meter by flying and falling so it doesn't run out. Just letting yourself freefall from a great height is one of the coolest sensations this game offers. Animations are one thing I really have to compliment the game for, and not just the animations but how physics are tied into them to make Cat's movements dynamic and natural looking. Everything you do feels freeform, and it's really up to you how you want to move around, and that even applies to combat despite being a pretty simple aspect of the game. I enjoyed combat for the most part because it's pretty unique conceptually, but it's also a little weak as there aren't that many options for fighting at your disposal. You can run up to enemies and kick them, but there really isn't that much engaging about this type of combat. You can levitate objects and throw them at enemies, but that's also dependent on whether there are things to throw in the environment. The more viable and enjoyable way to play is to get into the air and dive bomb your enemies' weak points. Then you can also use special attacks you gain throughout the story to deal a ton of damage at once. Overall, there isn't a lot of depth to your moveset, and primarily, combat boils down to maneuvering around and lining yourself up for attacks. Combat is definitely a weaker part of the game. It isn't bad, it's serviceable, but in a game with so much combat, I'd be remiss not to mention it, especially when I know so many of my viewers are action game savvy. Really, you're playing this game for the world, characters, story, and the experience of flying through these levels. Previously, this director has only made horror games, and we all know how the combat systems work in those, so it isn't surprising that his first game where you're actually supposed to take on groups of enemies wouldn't be pulled off flawlessly. Combat controls just fine, there just isn't enough to it to make it a selling point. There aren't any crazy cool combos, and the enemies don't really lend themselves to that kind of DMC-style combat in the first place. Aside from production values, this seems to be the biggest improvement to the sequel, because they knew they had to expand on this aspect of the series if they wanted it to continue for much longer. I think this light combat system worked when it was a portable game, you'd pop in, kick a few enemies, then go do something else. Now that this is a PS4 game where you sit down and play it for at least an hour or two at a time, the shallowness of the combat system is a lot more noticeable. This also brings to light how short the game is. For some reason, I remember the game being pretty lengthy on Vita, but I was able to beat the remaster in just 2 sittings while replaying it for this video. In the game's defense, I think going on for a lot longer would only be a detriment to the overall experience since the combat system is already wearing thin near the end. But I think people just expect a much longer experience from an open-world home console game, which is why I've heard this brought up as a negative so many times. Personally, I think the game is a good length for what it is, but I really hope its sequel is a lot longer as it's built from the ground up to be a home console release. After completing this game again through this remaster, I definitely feel like I appreciated it more than I did originally, and I thought it was really good the first time. I think being on a portable allowed me to zone out and not pay as much attention to the story and small details of the world. Or maybe it's just that the improved presentation allowed those aspects of the game to come across more powerfully to the player. There are definitely aspects of the game that were really impressive when it was a portable game that aren't as impressive now. We've had tons of huge open world games of varying sizes and quality this generation alone on home consoles, but experiencing a game of this quality on a portable was really novel. Though even now, it isn't like you're gonna come across many open world games that'll just let you float off your feet and take off into the sky anytime you want. This freedom is what still manages to set Gravity Rush apart when before it really didn't have any competition as a portable title. Even though this game may have some repetitive elements to it, it's still a very enjoyable experience that you're not going to get anywhere else. The game has a really interesting setting, style, and tone that'll leave a lasting impression on you, and it'll definitely get you excited to play more once the credits roll. This remaster was really well done and brings to life aspects of the game that were hidden under the Vita's tiny screen. I can't wait to experience its sequel and see this world and story fully realized with a bigger budget and improved design. And I hope you're there enjoying it too after you've given this game a playthrough if you haven't already. You're in for something really charming and different with this series, and it doesn't deserve to be overlooked. It isn't a perfect game, but Your Next Favorite has never been about perfect anything. It's about spreading the word about pieces of media that'll hold a place in your heart if you gave them a chance, and this game definitely fits the bill. Thank you all for watching, and see you all next time when we see if Gravity Rush 2 is good enough to be your next favorite as well.